What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining us on another FCP Euro DIY. Today, we're going to be working on a 2008 Mercedes-Benz W211 E63 AMG. Today on the W211 behind me, we're going to be covering how to do the rear brakes on your vehicle. This DIY is going to be applicable to your 2007 to 2009 E63 AMGs, your 2006 CLS 55 AMGs, your CLS 63 AMGs from 07 to 11, and your E55 AMGs from 03 to 06. Today we're going to be installing some Zimmermann rotors paired with some genuine Mercedes brake pads and a BOA wear sensor. All of these parts are available on fcpro.com, and we have a couple different variations of them depending on what you're looking for your Mercedes. A couple things to look for on these cars when the brakes are getting worn out is simply a visual inspection. You can see how much meat is left on your pads. You can check the dash to see if the warning light has been triggered by a failing sensor, and you can look at the face of the rotors. Also run your nail across the face of the rotors. As they wear, they will develop a lip, which is a good indicator that you want to replace them. In some extreme cases, you may get some pulsating in the brake pedal, but again, more than likely that's going to be coming from the front before you feel it in the rear. Now, before we get started on this DIY, let's take a look at some of the tools we're going to need for this job. And now for tools. For this DIY, we're going to be using a 1/2-inch drive torque wrench, a 1/2-inch drive ratchet, a 3/8 drive ratchet. We have a 17mm lug socket. We have an E18 Torx. We have a T30 Torx. I have two adapters. One's a 3/8 to a 1/4-inch drive for my T30, and one is a 1/2-inch extension that we'll be using with the E18. I have a 1/4-inch punch, a small caliper hook, and then some piston retractors. We have a small wire brush, a flathead screwdriver, a hammer, and then some nice to haves is an electric impact to get our wheels on and off a little bit easier, and an electric ratchet to speed up some of the hardware removal and install. And some always nice to have whenever you're doing a brake job is Liqui Moly ceramic brake paste. I'll show you how to use that when we get to it. Now we know what tools we're working with. Let's go ahead and get started on this DIY. All right, my good people, before we get started on this brake job, we're under the hood of the W211. We want to keep an eye on our brake fluid level. So to do that, you're going to want to remove this beauty cover, turn the two locking dowels 90 degrees counterclockwise, and then you can lift this up and set it to the side. Now, before you start the brake job, the idea here is that you're going to be compressing the pistons back into the calipers. You don't want to overpressurize the system, and you don't want to cause a leak in the system, especially up top here at the cap, which should be the weakest point. So what you can do is, if it's too full, take some fluid out and use a syringe tool, a turkey baster, whatever you have. And then once you're done with the brake job, you can top it off. Again, you don't want to empty this out. You don't want to introduce air into the system. In our case, this car is at a good level. We have more than enough room to account for the two rear calipers that we're going to be compressing today. So we'll keep the cover off. We'll keep an eye on it. And if we need to, we'll adjust accordingly. But with that covered, let's go ahead and get started on this DIY. All right, my good people, to get started on this brake job, we're going to go ahead and work on removing our lug bolts. This car happens to be equipped with studs, so we have 5 17mm nuts to remove. However, the stock lug bolts also take a 17mm socket. So let's go ahead and zap this off. Now with our wheel off, we have a better view at where we're going to be working. Before we take anything else off, we're going to start by removing our set screw. That way we can make sure that this rotor is going to come off. And we have kind of everything holding this in place so this doesn't spin around on us too much. Important note, you want to make sure your parking brake is off before starting this job. Just a couple taps should be good. Now we'll take our T30 and get this screw off. Beautiful. Now we have our set screw off. We're going to head over to the caliper side of things and work on removing our wear sensor and brake pads and go from there. All right, over here we have a brake pad wear sensor that we're going to want to disconnect. This one simply pulls back towards us. We're going to be replacing it, so I'm not too worried about damaging this one. Just comes out like that. Just a friendly reminder, it's going to sit on the inboard pad and it's going to sit on the top half of the pad. The pads really only go in one way, so it's not going to be too hard to mix up, but just so you don't forget that. With that removed, next we're going to work on punching out our pins that hold our pads and retaining clip in place. For that, we're going to need a hammer And I like to use a small 1/4-inch punch. You can use whatever size you have lying around. Just be careful when you're punching these through that you don't take the tapered end of the punch all the way into the caliper, or you'll get it jammed up in there. We got one pin out. We're gonna hit it with the wire wheel before we install it, but typically these should come out a lot easier. Now let's work on the bottom one. You can see I got a bigger punch. Keep your retaining clip. Now that we have the pins out, we're gonna work on splitting the pads up a bit so that they can compress the pistons back into the caliper housing. We can also use the tool once we pull the caliper off, but this will give us a head start. To do so, you can simply pry in between the two pads on the dampening ends of the ears. You can also shove it between the rotor and the brake pad. You don't want to shove it between the pad and the caliper. And just pry. These brakes are not that old. We've been using the car for some R&D on some different materials, so they're going to have a lot of meat left on them, which will make it a little bit hard to get our tool in there should we need to do that, but this will definitely give us a head start. All right, once we have those freed up, that will also make it so that you can get these out easier. There's one. There's two. You can note how that wear sensor goes into your brake pad. We'll show you it on the new one when we install everything. Now we're gonna go ahead and get the car up a little bit higher, or climb underneath it if you're working at home. Next on our list, we have the two E18 bolts out back that we need to remove. I'm gonna use a couple extensions on a 1/2-inch breaker bar to clear the lower control arms here and get to those bolts. On the passenger side, the filler neck gets in your way a little bit. On the driver's side, you're usually pretty clear. With those both free, I think I can zap them out with the electric ratchet. I'm just putting a swivel on my extension here so I can clear the filler neck tube. And then I'll leave that hang on there. Let's get the car more eye level, and then we'll work on pulling off our caliper and hooking it off to the side. Now I'm just gonna pull the rest of the bolt out by hand and then grab my caliper so it doesn't fall. And then we'll go ahead and hook it to the side while we swap out our rotor. All right. If you can take a peek in there, you can see we did a fairly good job at compressing the pistons with the flathead screwdriver. So we will not need to use our tool. However, should that not be the case for you at home, the tool simply goes in like this. Get it as even as possible over the pistons, and then ratchet it so that both ends expand and they compress the pistons in. Just hooking the hook up to the top of the sway bar. Anywhere will work that's sturdy, but these are really light. However, just because they're light doesn't mean you need to hang them off the brake line. Now with that, we can go ahead and pull off our rotor. Again, remember you want to make sure the parking brake is off if you haven't done that already. Otherwise, the shoes will be clamping on the inside of the drum, making it impossible to pull these off. At this point, you want to go ahead and clean your hub. I'm going to use a wire brush to give this a quick cleaning. So you can see this hub's in pretty good shape, but it never hurts to get any loose corrosion off. And again, this car has a stud conversion, so these are going to be in their way a little bit of cleaning, but typically you can take a wire brush, a wire wheel, Scotch-Brite pad, whatever you have to get the surface rust off. Now I'm going to take some Liqui Moly ceramic paste, spread it around the base of the hub where the rotor makes contact so that the next time someone does a brake job, it comes off as easily as it did today for us. Usually that's not the case, especially with New England cars, but this product makes it really easy to make that happen. Now, before we grab our new rotor, you want to make sure that your hands are somewhat clean. These are zinc coated. The last thing you want to do is hit the rotors with a brake clean or some sort of chemical that'll strip the coating, especially from the areas that are not making contact with brake pads. So I'm just going to give my gloves a quick wipe down. We'll handle it as best as possible. Set it on, and then we'll put our T30 set screw back in. Got my set screw hole lined up. I like to put a little paste beneath where the set screw sits. Some paste behind where the set screw sits is always nice. It'll keep it from seizing up in the future. If you're following along at home and you want to torque these, 8 Newton meters is going to be the value. We're just going to go ahead and snug them up by hand. All right, I'm going to unhook my caliper. Get our hook off. You don't want to leave that on the car. Ask me how I know. I'm going to go ahead and slide that back over. And then we'll get our E18s, both of them started by hand. Now with both of them started by hand, I'm just going to snug them up with the electric ratchet, and then we'll torque them down. Now we're going to grab our torque wrench, and we're going to torque those down to 180 Newton meters. With both of those torqued, we're going to get the car back eye level, and then we'll work on installing our pads and getting one step closer to wrapping up this DIY. Now we're going to go ahead and install our brake pads. We're going to start with the inboard pad first. And we're going to set our wear sensor in as well. That is very straightforward. They just clip into place, just like that. When you slide these in, you want to make sure your holes for the pins line up with the holes on the caliper. If they go too far in or too far out, just adjust them. This should be a good starting point for us. Now we can feed the outboard pad in. Beautiful. Now we're going to go ahead and install our pins and our retaining clip. We went ahead and hit them with the wire wheel a bit to clean them up. We also cleaned up the holes where they run through on the calipers. Just got a bunch of grime and gunk out of there. There's a lot of salt from the winter, so none of that stuff helps. We'll go ahead and get started. Feed the retaining pin in. Keep it loose for now. And we'll press the bottom half down with our fingers. I'm just going to use a punch to send them the rest of the way through from the back. Careful with the bottom one. You do have the electrical receiver for the wear sensor in your way. You can also remove it if you'd like, but just a couple taps should get it in. Now with that, we're going to want to go ahead and connect our wear sensor back into its receptacle. Pretty straightforward, just like we removed it. Line it up and feed it in. Now with that, my good people, all we have left to do is put the wheel back on and repeat the same steps on the driver's side. Let's go ahead and grab our wheel and our 5 17mm lug bolts. We'll get this on. All right, go ahead and throw our wheel on. The one nice thing about studs is that they do hold the wheel in place. And now we can go ahead and lower the car and torque these down properly. Now we can go ahead and torque down our wheel lug bolts to 135 Newton meters or 100 foot-pounds, whichever you prefer. You want to make sure you tighten them down in a star pattern. And boom, baby, there you have it, my good people. Another DIY in the books. Overall, a really straightforward job on the W211. Again, keep in mind, road grime and salt and corrosion might make the job a little bit difficult, but you can get through it. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, or you want to see specific jobs done on the W211 chassis, let us know in the comments below. And if you want to see more DIYs like this, please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.